This episode was sponsored by Property, the leading real estate agent for all real estate transactions with a comprehensive ecosystem. They combine highly trained experts with the latest technologies on an intelligent platform to provide clients, brokers, and service partners with risk-free, flexible, and simplified services. Learn more at property.com. That's property with an I.com.
I will be honest. I will never do, I think, as a founder at least. You never need to say no to leading a bigger company. This I don't know. But I will never, if I fund another company, have a company with more than 100 people. Because until 100 people, you know everyone, you can go super fast. And then at that phase, indeed, it becomes more complicated because of these cultural challenges, and they are very hard to fix.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Sylvain.
Jurgi, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you as a guest today.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation.
You are the co-founder and CEO at SOPHiA Genetics, a tech bio company with the mission to support healthcare professionals by maximizing the power of data-driven medicine. That's a very bold vision that you have and follow there. We're going to talk all about that. But before we do so, I actually want to talk about a rare case. You have built SOPHiA Genetics into one of Switzerland's very few NASDAQ-listed companies and startups in that case. And 2011, when you started out, it was not exactly the obvious moment to start an AI medtech company in that sense. What did you see back then that others didn't?
Oh, man, indeed, right? To your point, AI was, I think, not so popular as a term back then. But maybe taking a big step back, it's not so new neither. Sylvain, actually, for sure, AI was already there at the time of Enigma in World War II to be able to basically fight against the Nazi, right? So I think AI in the end can be summarized to smart algorithms that are the result of human intelligence, but coded so that it can scale. And indeed, in 2011, few people were speaking about that. Maybe one exception was IBM with Watson, which in healthcare ended up being a disaster because as well, some people have made overstatements of what AI is about and could do and so on. So for us, back 2011, basically what we would see is that in medicine, a lot of things would change and that we would move more from an art to more to a science. And in particular, into these areas, which are cancer and rare inherited disorders. And this was because in 2003, for the first time ever, we as human beings are being able to decode our whole genome, right? And this took, I think 13 years and $3 billion. It was crazy. But thanks to the decoding of the human genome, one would start to realize that data were very valuable, but as well very complex. And so at that time, our idea was, wow, the fact that now one can sequence a genome and the instruments that are doing the sequencing are being miniaturized is going to basically motivate hospitals to adopt these technologies so that they can better diagnose cancer, rare inherited disorders, and basically understand what are the mutations, the genetic variants driving those diseases. But this is massive amount of data. For each genome is 50 meters of book in a shelf in each of our single cells. So imagine the amount of data. I mean, there is nothing more intelligent than life, right, Sylvain? And so at that time we thought, wow, so look, there will be data. It's definitively an area where computing data will bring benefits to doctors for better diagnosis, better prognosis or treatment decision. And so to address that, probably we will need at some point to embrace algorithms, which to some extent were already used in the field of bioinformatics in research. And thanks to these algorithms, be able to improve the diagnosis and the treatment of patients. So that's why indeed we started in 2011 with this bold statement and using AI principles. I will be honest, Sylvan, there was a lot of debate within the company as well, whether this was AI or not. And our chief scientific officer, who was a second employee of the company, would say, that's bioinformatics and statistics. But in the end, this is AI. And happy to maybe explain you further afterwards what are the different techniques in AI.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm keen to get there. And I think what you just described is really the importance also of the timing, right? That the technological timing is there, but also having the right team in the right place at the right moment. That's probably what came together in 2011.
Absolutely.
I also want to briefly talk about your background because I found that very interesting when we did the research. You hold a PhD in molecular biology, but you also studied business and worked as a postdoc before you actually led a company called Gene Predictis. Did you always know that you wanted to be a founder rather than a scientist, or how did that evolve? Because that's a really interesting shift from my outside perspective.
Not at all, Silvan. Not at all. I would say I get interested in entrepreneurship when I was doing my PhD in Geneva, because at that time I started seeing that, it was great to do academic research, but that maybe things were taking very long so that you could see the impact of your research at some point in real practice, right? And my research in life science was extremely academic and fundamental. So, for example, we published with our chief scientific officer and one of the co-founders of SOPHiA that actually every gene is being transcribed, so written in both directions. When I went to study for my master degree, I was told in textbook it would be like genes are written only on one direction. I was doing research on extremely fundamental things, right? And so at that time, I thought, maybe I should understand, how some people who came with a scientific background are being able as well to innovate, innovation being not research, but adoption of technologies in the market. And this is where I started to be interested about that, Sylvan, and I followed the Venture Challenge program, which enabled me to learn basic things like, vision and team are the most important, or cash is king. But to be honest, despite that, my love from research pushed me indeed to continue my academic path. I was lucky to publish pretty well. I went to Oxford for a postdoc. And, in the end, it was just serendipity. It was like, I didn't want to go to live to another country again. I grew up in Basque Country. I live in Switzerland where I get to know my wife. I went to the UK. I was not in love of producing data in the lab. I love to have hypotheses. And so I thought, look, it was a fantastic ride. I'm publishing very well, but I'm impatient and I want to see something different. And so indeed, by chance, I was introduced to some of the founders of this company called Gene Predictis, and they were crazy. They just decided to recruit me as a CEO. So this was definitively a chance for me to be now in the world of startups and in the world of innovation. But so in a nutshell, it was not planned at all. I had not this ambition. My ambition has always been to do something I like, because we spend a lot of time at work, and something I feel I would contribute to progress.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a very noble motivation to have. Nevertheless, I assume that the shift from academics and your career there to becoming the CEO of a company, that was probably quite different. Was it a shock for you, or sort of a boot camp to shift the gears, or was it easier than expected?
Actually, it was not so easy, but in the meantime, maybe I was kind of so unsophisticated that I didn't realize what was the challenge about. I just took it, right? So it was like, okay, so I will do that. So in the beginning for me, it was quite interesting. I spent 8 years in a lab working, as the Americans say, like a dog, because I love it. Going in the evenings, in the weekends, producing data for my research. And then I was like, I'm in my car. I'm going from one client to the other. I'm basically helping the 7 people who are at Gene Predictis to coordinate things. I'm making a bit of strategy on what we need to strengthen on the product side and what we may have to simplify. So I kind of like it, but I did it with instinct, which actually, to your point on, me having done a PhD and then having done an executive MBA at the EPFL, this was the motivation why I did the executive MBA, is that I did run that company for a year with instinct. It ended up pretty well. If I remember, revenue grew 30% while the company was declining. We doubled the revenue in the strategic segment, which was genetics. But I could sense that I was kind of navigating without having the tools, right? And so for me, the motivation of doing this executive MBA was to know the rules, to know what was accounting, to know how you're supposed to do marketing, how you're supposed to take decisions. And to some extent, I learned some technicalities to become probably a more informed, a better entrepreneur. But in the end, it reassured me as well on what I had done at Gene Predictis, and that, a lot of this was still common sense, gut feeling, information, motivating people, and so on.
You touch up on two very important topics right there, I feel. The one that we're just talking about now with the education is we have endless discussions with our podcast guests, right? And many say, well, you have to have it a bit in you to become an entrepreneur. This is hard to learn. So I wonder, the executive MBA, would you do that again? Do you feel it was worth the time investment to get this sort of backpack of knowledge to help you run the company better? Or would you say, well, maybe I wouldn't do it anymore. It was great back then, but it's probably not worth it?
I love your question. I really love it. And I will tell you why. So I think the executive MBA indeed is very particular, and it's very much done for the entrepreneurs or for people who want to be entrepreneur. And actually, the first week, I had huge pressure because we were 25 and the 25 of us had to present in front of the others our project. To be accepted in this MBA, you needed to have an entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial project. And so I was like, it's going to be 1.5 years. A lot of work. It would be lectures on Fridays and Saturdays, plus a lot of work on Sunday. We just funded SOPHiA, and I started working at SOPHiA the same week. So it was a lot of pressure. And I thought I better convince that my project is a good use case, because then out of the 25, only 5 projects would be followed during the year. And you would have people basically joining your team to do all the use cases around your project, which for me was SOPHiA. So I would definitively do it, but in exactly that context. And I like your question, because I have a lot of colleagues, who, like me, were scientists and then joined SOPHiA and grow dramatically on a positive sense, becoming seasoned sales executives. And then at some point, had the desire to do executive MBAs, and often I discourage them of doing that, because for me, at least, what works is to learn by doing. And so in that regard, the MBA for me was not the way to learn, was a practice. It gave me the opportunity to basically polish my entrepreneurial ideas about SOPHiA in a context where they were giving me guide rails to be able ultimately to do a business plan.
Yeah, I love that. The entrepreneurs are out there. They have to do and to build stuff, right? That rarely happens in just the classroom alone.
Yeah, maybe on that one, Sylvain, I should say, for me, this is hard, right? I think it's not easy, I think, to work with founders and entrepreneurs, because indeed, this is how we are probably made. Your point, maybe it's hard to teach someone to be an entrepreneur. You can teach the technicalities that I explained you. For me, this was the MBA about. But I think it's hard to work with entrepreneur because we are so much about doing and we're so impatient that sometimes for others, it can be too much, right? Because we demand the same intensity on the others.
Definitely. The other topic you touched upon was being a bit naive in the beginning. And I hear that over and over again in our podcast. And I feel many very successful companies would have probably never been founded if there were not some naive founders in the beginning who had no clue what they were getting themselves into, because then you also don't see all the risks and all the things that can go wrong. Do you also agree that this was sort of necessary to just jump into it and make it happen no matter what?
I think so. And I think when you are comfort, which was not my case, right? I was a postdoc. I told you I didn't want to go to another country again. And I was not earning much and I had two daughters. I think when you have comfort, so, a super well-established job in a big company, I don't know, Nestle or whatever, I guess it's harder to be an entrepreneur because you don't have this requirement to basically do something, not only to contribute, but as well to improve how you're living and how you can support your family, definitively. So, yeah, I think probably a lot to your point are naive. And what you just said remind me what Jensen Wang said recently in a podcast that I very much like called Acquired. And, and I know you want to ask me that question as well. And I will tell you at the end what's really my answer. But they ask him at the end, when did you start? Did you realize what you would do? And what would you do today with the same people, right? You can take your best people. What you do? And Jensen says, nothing. It's too hard. I never thought it would be so hard, right? So I'm not going to start anything anymore, nothing. I don't want it. And I think this is the naivety you're talking about. It's better not knowing everything because indeed it's going to be a lot of effort.
Yeah, that's how many successful companies start. It's just, being a bit naive in the right place with the right people at the right time, and great things can happen. So let's focus on 2011 when you actually founded SOPHiA together with Pierre and Lars. I wonder, how did you get your first customers to trust you with something as sensitive as genomics data?
It was very hard. It was very hard because for people at that time, they thought that genomic data was a crystal ball. That Sylvain, I could envision what your future will be like, right? And beyond that, computing the data in the cloud was essential because of the quantity and the size of this data. And cloud was really not understood at all, neither, and not trusted. I mean, even in Switzerland today, it's crazy, but I think most of the university hospitals are not in the cloud, which is much more dangerous than being in the cloud. You can debate on privacy, but on security, much more dangerous not being in the cloud today. So it was very hard. So, when we started, our value proposition was to basically store and secure the data, compute the data, annotate the data, and visualize the data to help geneticists and pathologists take decisions on patient diagnosis. And in 2011, I recruited our chief scientific officer, who is still with us, our at the time chief technology officer, now chief architect officer, and a salesperson. And he would come from the software industry, but in the banking segment. And my board at the time was, do you really need to recruit a salesperson? I mean, you are the one representing the company and you have to be the one selling. And I said, of course, and I will do that. But, I'm not a super experienced salesperson, right? And this proved to be very good because I remember vividly being with Didier in some meetings, and even he wouldn't have the scientific background, he would ask very naive questions. And at some point, some potential customers in Bern told us, everything you offer, storage, compute, security, visualization, annotation, perfect. But today, I'm not using the new instruments to produce patient genomic data because I don't trust them. What do you mean you don't trust these instruments? No, these instruments are super powerful. I can do more than with the other sequencing technologies I had before, so-called Sanger sequencing, but I don't trust their accuracy. And indeed, because technologically, those sequencers create data at scale, but very dirty data. And their fear was, I may misdiagnose patients. And so this is where we understood, we knew that AI and bioinformatics was important. We thought about the annotation, the classification of the mutations. But now we will need to invest as well on finding the signal into the data so that we can correct the noise and make the data trustful for the geneticists and pathologists. And why this was important, Sylvain, is because Then when we would show the clients what we could do while we were computing their data, all the fears around data privacy would be secondary and would almost disappear. You would have to reassure them, but they would become secondary because now they would understand we have those technologies, they are powerful with these people, with their algorithms. We can get what we need. Okay, I can accept to put my data into the cloud.
Amazing. So it also sounds that there were two things, right? You had to improve the technology, that it was reassuring and the quality was right. But at the same time, you also really had to educate the market a bit. And for that, the consumers, potential users, they have to listen to you. So was it simply by showing them what your technology was capable of? Or how did you build that trust that you were able to educate them? Because that's probably the pivotal moment right there where you then sort of make it or break it, right?
Yeah, it was definitively a pivotal moment, 100%. This was, we started in 2011 with no technology. And we started from 2012 already trying to sell the concept to potential customers, but not having any technology, which to your point enabled us to basically further tailor what we had to develop. 100%, you're right. We had to demonstrate them always the outcome of our algorithms against a benchmark. So in the hospitals, to make it simple, this means that, they have samples they have already tested with legacy technologies and on which they believe they know the ground truth. And then they are producing genomics data with the new instruments and let you compute the data. And then they compare the outcome of the compute of the data with it, with basically the result they got from orthogonal solutions on the same samples in the past. And this is how you need to demonstrate them that you're identifying everything they knew, plus you're identifying new things. And even today, Sylvan, we do a lot of implementations around the world. And every time, because we are addressing healthcare needs, and so every patient needs to be perfectly diagnosed with the knowledge and the technologies that are proper at that time. Every time we need to go through this demonstration, even today with healthcare professionals. It's very hard.
It never stops, the convincing and educating part.
Never.
And your track record is really impressive. You work with more than 800 healthcare institutions. You're active in more than 70 countries. So I also wonder, what does your business model look like? How do you get paid for your solution, for your services that you provide to them?
Yeah, so we made, I think, a very smart decision from the beginning for two reasons. So basically, we first wanted to be able to serve everyone in the sense that we didn't want to penalize the smallest hospitals. And second, we thought that the data volume in our space of precision medicine, but particularly for us data-driven medicine, would grow year on year for maybe 100 years. And so considering these two elements, we decided that we would go into a consumption-based approach where basically hospitals would pay us every time we would add patient data into our platform. And one could argue that maybe with another model, we could have been profitable earlier, but we may have killed our market as well. Because in our space, the projections are that only speaking about genomics, and today we do more computed genomics, but that genomics data in the clinical market should grow about 10 to 15% annually at minimum, right? And so if we would have gone into a model where it would be, licenses, annual licenses, given that our customer base will never be more than, let's say, 5,000 hospitals around the world, we would have killed our potential. And the good thing as well of this model, Sylvan, which to be honest is something I had never anticipated, is that it basically make you extremely customer centric and it defines how you're going to interact with customers, given that if they are not happy with your technology, they just not use your technology. It's not a sell and go, right? I'm not going and selling an instrument and okay, I will come back in 5 years' time. Every week, they may put you pressure on improving the outcome of your algorithms. And in that sense, I think this defined a lot as well the DNA and the culture and the obsession to satisfy customers at SOPHiA.
I like that because it's a very value-focused approach. So you really get paid for the value that you generate for the healthcare institutions you work with. But at the same time, I can imagine from an investor's perspective or whatsoever, they might say, no, we would like to have more recurring revenue. So I wonder, how do you then drive that they actually continue using your platform over multiple times over and over again?
Yeah, no, very fair point. And obviously, despite we're in healthcare, our metrics are tech company metrics, right? So we follow churn. So I would say, luckily, in the healthcare industry, because of the conservatism, you rarely easily or quickly change from one platform to the other. So our churn is 3% on an annual basis, right? But the barrier of entry is very high, as I was telling you, right? So it takes a lot of time to sign and to implement. But then if they're not happy or, their volumes are reducing, eventually it takes more time that they kick you out. But in that sense, yeah, of course, it's extremely important. And especially because we're in an environment that is continuously evolving, because our knowledge on cancer, on rare inherited disorders is evolving every year, not every week. The technologies and the capabilities in the labs to better decipher these are evolving as well super rapidly. And the drugs that patients can benefit from are evolving as well extremely quickly, right? So in that sense, in an industry like the one of SOPHiA, so data-driven medicine, it's extremely important to be able to quickly iterate the platform with new features, new benefits, new capabilities. In our case, every 3 weeks with complete non-regression testing. And this is how, to some extent as well, we can keep up with the new demand of the customers. And then, as it is for a classical, if you like, tech sales pitch book, it's a land and expand game, right? So you're landing customers. I told you we will never have more than 5,000. And then you're expanding customers. So it means customers may start with one application that we cover in our platform, for example, to diagnose rare inherited disorders. And then maybe when they are delighted with that, they are telling, oh, but in hereditary cancer, we are using other technologies and we may have that volume as well being computed into your platform. And then they may say, oh, now let's do that for even more sophisticated things, so that solid tumor and so on. So this land and expand, if you like, strategy and constant move in terms of innovation is something that is extremely important, to your point, in our future and current growth.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Once they capture the value, they want to have more of the same value for other areas. Yeah, amazing.
Absolutely. And maybe along those lines, our benefits are very clear. So we enable them to detect things that they would miss. So this accuracy, which, as we discussed, right, we need to demonstrate that systematically. We enable them to do the data compute, but overall diagnosis much more rapidly. We enable them to launch new capabilities much more rapidly, to your point on constant innovation, to identify new biomarkers and so on. And overall, we reduce the cost, because by better computing data, we can see more things. And by seeing more things, they have to do less tests on those patients.
That sounds like a no-brainer to me. Like,
Yeah, it
it's an
is. But
amazing
despite
pitch.
that, you still need to demonstrate the accuracy. That's the key one. Yeah.
Exactly. Jurgi, I also want to talk about how you actually built the company, because you mentioned the culture before, right? And scaling the culture is something that is really, really difficult, but also really important to do. You grew SOPHiA from 3 employees to over 400. You have offices in Switzerland, in France, in the United States. How did you scale the culture across the amount of people, but also across geographies at the same time?
Well, we did that, I think, quite good initially, and then very poorly until we would realize the challenges around culture, and better probably over the last years. So indeed, started in 2012, really, recruiting Genu, Adam, and Didier, which have been instrumental into our journey as a CSO, CTO, and VP sales. And then I think it was kind of end of 2017, we're about 100 people. And this is where really we had demonstrated the product market fit. And at that time, we decided, wow, now let's be more ambitious and scale our sales execution, right? And so we moved to kind of 250 people and end up before COVID at 350 people. And I would say until 300, as executives, we would know really what people were doing, where they were focused. And then post-COVID, we made a huge mistake. And, I'm happy at some point to maybe share that with you in more detail. But as entrepreneurs, you're recruiting as well executives who come from different worlds and companies and different ideas. And they were pushing me hard to recruit much, much more people. And so in a year, we moved from 350 to 550 people. And this was one of the biggest mistakes I made because as Adam, our former CTO, told me, not only we did a lot of recruitments of people that we didn't onboard well, right? Which is super bad stewardship job as executives and as a CEO to the new people you recruit. But beyond that, we recruited people that would recruit people and who had no idea about the culture of the company. And this in a phase where moving from 300 to 500 to you're moving from basically people to process as well to some extent was really awful timing. And so indeed, my learning then has been that, wow, I shouldn't take culture from granted. And the culture being very simple things, like, okay, are people, cleaning up the table after they had lunch in the cafeteria of the company? It's just this type of behaviors. But of course, that are then even more important in a business setup. And we realized that, yeah, we missed that. We missed that. So I had asked as well some very successful entrepreneurs to share their experience on how they had gone through that and so on. And this is where we started to better organize our communication and our plans within the company. We set up virtues and not values because values are about belief and virtues are about action. So for us, this is we do, we decide, we learn, we adapt, we collaborate, we innovate. And our mantra is we care. We care of patients, of people, of customers. We as well set up programs that I would follow monthly, programs being cross-departmental efforts. At some point we had a program around biopharma or around liquid biopsy, right? Because for us, these were really important transformative programs into the company. And along those programs, we would have initiatives and all that managed into what we call a delivery and execution office, basically, to help people understand, if you like, Sylvain, what they are supposed to do, not how they are going to do things, what they are supposed to do, and how by doing so they contribute to the strategy of the company. Because this was as well, I think, big unsatisfaction at the time of people. They wouldn't necessarily understand why we're doing things and how they were contributing to that. And basically, I will be honest, I will never, if I fund another company, have a company with more than 100 people. Because until 100 people, you know everyone, you can go super fast. And then at that phase, indeed, it becomes more complicated because of these cultural challenges, and they are very hard to fix.
I imagine. And thank you for sharing that because I feel many founders, no matter if too early or too late a stage, they run into a similar problem at one point where they hire too many people too fast. And then you have like vectors going all over the place, but not in the same direction. Then that's really hurting. It can even kill a company in the end.
Agree. And Sylvain, I think beyond that, and I really genuinely say that, I felt bad because I think for me, clarity is very important. Because otherwise we're putting people in difficult situations. And so again, I felt we're being bad to all these people. Because of that, they wouldn't see, their impact and what they had to do, and they would suffer.
Absolutely. And I mean, ultimately, that's your responsibility as a leadership team, right? You are responsible for every employee in the company.
Absolutely.
And I also wonder in that sense, you mentioned you don't want to have a company bigger than 100 people. Isn't that also a bit the trade-off that you need to go above 100 people to build something really big on a global level?
Could be, yeah. There are exceptions. WhatsApp is an exception, right?
Fair. Or Instagram also back in the days, right? Yeah.
Could be. I think probably trying maybe to minimize your sales force and having others sell for you, right? In the spirit of an Intel Insight and focusing on core capabilities could be a way of doing that. Yeah, I agree with you. It means as well accepting that maybe you won't build something that might have the same impact around the world. But, in the same spirit of what Jensen said, it's very hard. SOPHiA is small, but for me, it has been very hard, even physically, to run that company. I had a lot of back issues and so on. And I wouldn't have the energy to do exactly the same, despite obviously I would have the experience. So, which, one could argue the case might be easier, but no, I wouldn't have the energy anymore. So below 100, I think, maybe to be seen.
Now, we also have a lot of discussion going on in the world, where we talk about AI making people more productive, serving as a bigger leverage. I know that you have a very human-centered approach or a philosophy how you build your company. Nevertheless, I wonder, where do you see AI in there? Do you think maybe even it is possible to have less than 100 people and still build something very, very big, because now AI serves sort of as a leverage that makes all of these 100 people way more productive? How do you see these discussions at the moment?
It's interesting because I never discussed that with you, but you have a good sense of people yourself as well. Indeed, it's ironic, right? I'm quite, I would say, skeptical as well on AI in general. And I think this is what you sense. So we are now implementing some AI technologies, well, for operational needs. But I will tell you first why I'm skeptical before I tell you what we are doing. I'm just skeptical because I'm afraid about having people who stop thinking, basically, and are just leveraging on AI tools to produce massive amount of slides and data and basically making others busy, right? And this is what scares me. But on the positive side, in the era of AI agents, which are basically assistants, right? Definitively, there are things that are beneficial. Personally, I never use Chat GPT. I often call it as well Chat GTP rather than GPT, but my family explained me that in French, PT means something else. And so now I remember, right, why it's Chat GPT. But we'll give you an example. We've just implemented recently a tool in the legal department to basically enable the legal people to go quicker into the documents, referencing the documents as well. So, for example, if you are changing some document terms to know which are exactly all the documents where you may need to revisit the terms, we are as well using some technologies to try to identify early on bugs in our codes, which enable us to save a lot of time. And hopefully, this I would really like it, but requires well recording our data. We should be able as well at understanding what is the best path in the sales pipeline to optimize your basically probability to end up closing a deal, right? So these are tools that indeed we're implementing in the company, but always with very well defined needs and making sure that as we are adding those tools, we're not adding more and more systems as well into the equation, because otherwise, you end up in a phase where now you may be using 500 softwares in the company. And then being publicly listed companies, we have a lot of as well requirements to the authorities and to auditors in the medical field, such as cybersecurity and so on. And all the softwares become a threat as well, right? And eventually become as well a silo. Because now, for example, I am using Jira to communicate with you. It's not very efficient, right? So this is I would say, the balance that we're trying to find. And I have as well friends who are venture capitalists who are telling me that they use a lot ChatGPT, not the professional version, but the payable version, to basically investigate and search companies and compare different companies. So for me, it's a kind of a search engine, if you like, in that sense. And as a search engine or an organization engine, I think AI agents are definitely very, very important and very good assistants.
It makes a ton of sense. And I love the specific use case that you outlined right there. That's super valuable. with all the change, no matter whether it's AI or the scaling of your company from 3 to 100 to 250, even up to 500 or more than 500 employees, many founders, they really struggle to keep up with that growth because their role changes so fast all the time. How did you do it, and what were sort of the biggest changes for you that you also had to adapt from the early days to now the scale up phase that you're in?
Yeah. Look, another very good question, and I don't think I've been overthinking about it, right? I think as a CEO, especially entrepreneur, you're basically trying to dedicate time to either things that don't work or things that have high potential. And so naturally, this will develop your skills. So for me, in the beginning, it was very much about understanding how to find the right product market fit. And this has been, I would say, the focus until 2015. Then it has been about understanding how to scale sales operations and how to animate salespeople and the sales organization. Then it went more into things related to overall organizational operational excellence and ultimately to culture, right? As we discussed. And obviously, along those lines, I had to learn about how to be part of the filing of a S1, equivalent of F1, to list your company in the NASDAQ, right? But maybe one chance I have, I think, Sylvain, is that I learn quickly. So if you would ask me tomorrow to do another listing of a company, I was told by one of our investors, oh, in general, CEOs don't want to do that again. For me, it was not hard, to be honest. There are other things that definitively probably have been harder. And among which I think has been how to over time as well improve my understanding of what a board requires, how a board think, so that they have sufficient qualitative information to challenge you, accept that they have to challenge you as well, so that then on that basis you can make better decisions. And so probably for me, this is where I think I had to evolve the most. And it could be that for a founder CEO is often the case, right? Because we're very passionate. And then when we are reporting to a board, sometimes we can be frustrated as well. So learning how to manage that, learning how to accept sometimes, to say, okay, I'm not sure it's the best idea, but there is a consensus. So on that one, I will give up, and learn as well when not to give up. One is really, really important because you feel like you are not really well understood. And to your point, it could be a question of the survival or the strategic direction of the company.
Absolutely. And I still feel like now just listening to, these skill sets, they are all quite different. So to really learn and adapt to them, that takes a lot of learning capability. So that's probably your secret weapon there that you just described. I love that. I also want to talk about the headquarter. I know you are building your US presence. You are very strongly present in Boston next to the beautiful Fenway Park, the baseball stadium. But nevertheless, you still have your headquarter in Switzerland, which I personally love from an ecosystem perspective. Why is Switzerland, despite being publicly listed in the US and being in full growth mode, still the right place for you to build your company?
Yeah, it's a very good question actually, and maybe that's as well kind of a bit of a watch out for other entrepreneurs who funded their company and want to list themselves in the US. Being listed in the US as a foreign private issuer, which is the case of SOPHiA, who is a Swiss company, can be as well a big disadvantage because it's hard then to be on the indexes or the Russells, and not being in the Russells, you're not part of the ETFs, and not being part of the ETFs, it means that the daily volume of transaction that you will have as a stock listed in the US will be probably 8 times less than if you would be an American company listed in the US. And obviously, this is done to motivate companies to become American, right? So I would say, aside the business, right, the growth, because indeed the US should be our biggest market, is the fastest growing one. That's maybe, with my experience now, consideration that may have made that we would have become an American company before we would list ourselves in the NASDAQ. Beside that, obviously, we have attachments, right? We are a global company. We're not an American company. To some extent, we're very European as well. And, if we could have as well European companies win in the field of tech with big and bold missions, it would be pretty nice, right? So on the other side, as a human being, this is what I would really like, and maybe as well motivates SOPHiA being still a Swiss company. And ultimately, for me, Sylvan, so that nobody would have this type of debates and decisions, we need one thing: a big public listed market in Europe. One, not Switzerland, England, France, one. And until this is not being solved, the only markets that will matter will be basically the American market. So Wall Street, New York Stock Exchange, and NASDAQ. And that's very important because if you want to build big companies, potentially create a lot of jobs and so on, you need to have the means. And to have the means, you need a capital. And to have the capital, it needs to be in a market that is interesting for the financial market. And the reality is that outside the very large companies like Roche, Nestle, or Louis Vuitton, or those type of companies, the European markets are really bad.
Yeah, that's unfortunately true. That's a fact. And I think your analysis is spot on. We need one European market. But honestly, do you think that we will get there in the near future? Because I feel it's still everything is so fragmented. You have different languages, different regulations, etc. Is it even realistic that we will get there in Europe?
I don't think, fortunately, the probability is high. But, I'm Basque, right? So we are among the indigenous of Europe. And when I was born, Basque schools wouldn't exist. And my parents and others fighted for that. And look, now Basque is official in the Spanish side of Basque country. Basque schools are accepted in France. And I say accepted is like in Switzerland, right? In France, there is only one national language, which is French. So the reason I highlight that is that despite, it's going to be hard and might be a lost cause, it's worth still to be advocating for that, because it might be that at some point this is being realized. And I am a true European. You're younger than I, but I don't know. I grew up with the wishes of having a federal European region, right? And so I believe that as Europeans, we are very different, but we are very similar as well in our values. And I hope that Europe will continue to strengthen rather than the opposite.
The hope dies last. Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
Let's also look at the IPO. Since you went public, the stock actually dropped quite a bit. I think at around 79%. A lot, yeah.
Yes.
What factors drove that, and what lessons do you have to share for other founders? Because I assume you're not happy about that, but it also probably increases the pressure on you. How do you deal with that? Do you have any reasons and lessons to share with us on that?
It's very frustrating. When we went public, our revenue was just above $30 million. And this was 2021. The 2020 revenue, right, was just above $30 million. And we went public in last week of July 2021. And in 3 years, so which means 2023, in 23, we had doubled our revenue. So now we were above $60 million revenue, right? So the performance of the company had been quite good in that period. And despite that, to your point, the stock completely went down. The reality is that for the good and the bad, we went public on July 2021. So since then, it has been like the .com for the healthcare industry. To give you some other data points, last quarter, for the first time ever in 15 years, there had not been any biotech listing, neither in New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. And so, a lot of people remember the .com, and it has been the same for the healthcare space, or the tools, the diagnostic, the tech bio, the biotech, since now 2021. And because of that, there being, I would say, a general mistrust of the market into the stocks and into the growth stories. And what became important for the market was, are you doing, let's say, more than $100 million revenue? are you profitable? And are you growing maybe above 20%? Or is your market cap above 500 million or above a billion? And that's hard maybe to understand for, people who are still private. When you're public, the investors are public institutions. These are huge institutions. And you have a portfolio manager. And the portfolio manager makes clear-cut decisions. Despite an analyst, which is a buy-side analyst, may love stories, the portfolio manager will say, okay, you know what? I want to see the company we're owning. And basically, you're cutting everything where the market cap is below 1 billion, or you're cutting everything that is not profitable, or you're cutting everything, that is not still generating $100 million revenue. And so because of that and the environment in healthcare, indeed, our stock has been very much penalized, despite, I would say, a performance which has been pretty good. And in particular, much better than all our peers in precision medicine. And learnings from that, I don't know. I would still have done it, Sylvain, because we raised a lot of money, over 220 million or 240 million at the IPO at a good price, which means that, I would say the investors that are being loyal to us for many, many years, at least hadn't been diluted with a very unfair price at that time. Now, whether, we would have been better doing that at that time privately or selling the company, or you never know. But it's better to, I think, don't overthink about those things and basically work from where you are with the constraints that you cannot necessarily control.
Maybe to go public, would you have waited a little bit longer to do the step?
Ideally, we would have gone 1 year before. And it's just like maybe at the board, we hadn't either. I don't know whether the term is a courage, but maybe we hadn't really decided that, or we hadn't. Yeah. And I would have gone a year earlier because it would have given us a year before the crash to at least educate the market about our story. Because there, what happened is July 2021, we list ourselves. We had $1.4 billion that could be invested in the book. That was like what you do is you do roadshow and then, investors are disclosing their interest. So we could have raised 1.4 billion. We had said it would be around 220 million. So on the book, we selected who would invest. And then the week after, the markets were closed. Nobody would invest again in companies like SOPHiA, Tech Bios, or Diagnostic Tools and Solutions. A lot of companies who I think had business models that will probably never be profitable, but had values inflated and raised a lot of capital, went bankrupt in our space. A lot. And so all that created, I think, as I said, a mistrust of the industry, unfortunately, a bit like in the .com. The good news is probably the companies that will manage to go over that will be stronger, right? And will be potentially the winners afterwards.
Yeah, the pure substance can survive these downturns because you have a real business that can back up the numbers and come back stronger eventually.
Exactly. And in that sense, I like to be listed publicly. I found the pressure of the quarterly performance being positive. I may surprise you, but I'm okay with that.
I like that. I think it's a good challenge also to have, I envision. Exactly. I have one more question for you, because now we heard the full fledged of your journey. And before we talk about the future, I wonder, every founder usually has at least one point, if not many, in their career where they're thinking about, that's it, it's not going to work, or I'm fed up, I want to quit. Did you ever encounter such a moment where you just wanted to leave it all?
Yeah, of course. So the first time was very early, 2012. As a founder, we had invested $70,000 each. So for me, it was the money that basically my parents added aside if one day I would like to buy an apartment. And I was just, a postdoc CEO, so I was earning very little money. And while I was raising money for the first time, I had been super naive. I had someone very sophisticated in our space who said, "Oh, you need $800,000. Fine, I'm going to take all the round." And I trusted him. And then I had a second appointment with him to move forward, right, with investment. And the guy didn't show up. And it was his CFO who would tell me, yeah, actually, he's not going to invest. And there, Sylvan, I thought it was finished. I called everyone, including we just bought an apartment. We had a huge loan with my wife, who at the time was working at Merckx Renault, who was well shut down in Geneva. And so I was calling everyone to basically raise money. And, I don't know, miraculously, maybe again, the sense of urgency made that we raised money with super good people, including someone who was a founder and ended up being our chairman for many years. So this was definitively one. And then I can tell you another one, which was really tight, right? Because I think, we made 6, 7, or 8 rounds of financing. And so, of course, you're always short in the financing. So this was March 2020. We had money until September 2020. So at that time, we were probably 300 something people already in the company. So a lot of responsibility. And what happened is that in November, I started raising capital and I got 2 term sheets. And one of them was from SoftBank. And I thought, wow, okay, interesting. But in the meantime, a big company in our space, very, very, very big, a European, was eventually interested in acquiring SOPHiA as well. So I had to negotiate with SoftBank. In the meantime, have a due diligence on, potentially selling the company to this giant in Europe. And ultimately, they decided not to move forward with the acquisition. So this enabled me to better negotiate the terms because I had confidence with SoftBank and I had to go to present to Massason. I went to present to Massason. They were convinced. They wanted to invest. We got the term sheet on March, I think 13 or 14. Guess what? Lockdown. And so 3 days later, no term sheet signed from SoftBank, right? And at the time, the woman who was working for their vision fund was not reachable. But maybe I insisted. And 2, 3 days later, she told me, I'm so ashamed, Jurgi. We've been working with you for 2 months. We were, ready to go ahead. But Massa is telling us, you guys are crazy. We don't know where the world is going to go. We're not doing any investment. We're keeping our cash. And they're, raising money in the middle of the pandemic with just a couple of months was really hard. And so what I did is very atypical. I asked my lawyer to do a term sheet on the basis of kind of the terms I had with SoftBank. I wanted to be fair to, the potential investors. So I didn't change the valuation. I didn't change the preference, but there were some terms around governance that I didn't like. So I keep it very simple. And I went to see some investors who I knew in the past couldn't have invested as much as they wanted. And miraculously, in a month's time, I had $60 million.
Wow. That's
So this
crazy.
was definitively another time where I had to put my blinders. Nobody could help me, or actually not help me much. And I was like, okay, I will find a solution. I need to make it happen and just be super focused on that.
That's insane. And it also shows you the roller coaster ride, that how close the super highs and the lowest lows can sometimes be together. That's crazy.
100%.
How much did you sleep back then? I guess you probably didn't get a lot of sleep.
It was still fine. For me, it turns out that when I don't sleep well, it's because of human misunderstandings. More than pure performance. And so, often as an entrepreneur, you're being asked indeed what makes you don't sleep, right, at night. And it's when I feel like I'm not getting something from someone who I like and I don't know how to express that, or I feel a tension. This is where I don't sleep very well.
Makes sense. I also want to look a bit into the future. I feel you're off to a really strong track record, or continuing your strong track record. Your latest earnings came in and you have really good growth, etc. So where are you taking SOPHiA? How will you balance innovation and investments in the future versus staying or being profitable and making the investors happy?
Yeah. So first, I would start by telling that, I'm so proud, Sylvan, that our technology benefited today almost 2.2 million patients that have been diagnosed from cancer and rare inherited disorders in a way that was not possible without our technology, or at least not with the same accuracy. And it's 30 to 35,000 every month right now. So for me, I would say, ultimately, the end of my life in my bed thinking about SOPHiA, this will be probably the most important thing that I will think about all the rest. But obviously, the financial performance is super important. As we said, our mantra is we care, patients, hospitals, investors who need to make money out of the investments. Otherwise, they're not going to invest in other projects. It's just logical. So our plan is quite, I would say, clear, and is very much, I would say, as well, supported by the good sales performance we've been having over the last year, which is not yet fully implemented. So we're dedicated on growing 20 to 30%, ideally above 30% for the next years. And we committed to the market that we would be EBITDA profitable by end of 26. So it means basically that one need to always improve how one is operating, obviously, because for us, more signing means more implementation, but we cannot recruit more people until we are profitable. And so this is a bit of a Lego on how you're maybe changing priorities, what you're stopping to do as well, right? But when it comes to innovation, because of one of your initial questions, the rapid evolution in our space is still very important to continue to evolve and innovate. Today, indeed, we could decide, okay, we need to be only 150 people. We might be generating, I don't know, next year, let's say north of $100 million, maybe slightly less, maybe slightly more, but just to give you a sense. And definitively, and we have gross margins of 74% on an adjusted basis. So definitively, we would be profitable. But if we would do so, we wouldn't be able to be the company I want being in 10 years' time. We would basically limit our performance, not of 26, not of 27, but starting from 28, 29, 30, it would enable us to serve on opportunities that are going to become massive.
Makes a lot of sense. Very well described. So to wrap up, Jurgi, for today, I have some rapid fire questions for you. I give you a short question or options to choose from, and you have to answer ideally in one sentence.
Fine.
Let's go. Is there one book or podcast that has shaped how you think?
Book, The Lean Startup, and podcast, The Acquired Podcast.
Nice. What is one thing European founders underestimate about building globally?
The challenge of distance, because in the end, back to culture, having people at distance makes sometimes the understanding and the execution difficult.
Is there any Swiss founder that you think is the most underrated Swiss founder today?
So that's not such easy question, but I would say probably the company that comes to my mind is Echo Robotics, with two founders being, I think, extremely visionaries. And I hope that, that's going to be a company that will get more and more attention because of the mission of what they are doing. Aurélien de Moret and Steve Tanner were the founders.
Amazing. That's a good segue to invite them to our podcast as well.
Yes, you should.
If you lost SOPHiA tomorrow, what would you start next or do next if you were not about to start another company?
Oh, so yeah, as I said, probably nothing. So eventually I would become a farmer.
Nice. I like that. Do you have any daily habits that keep you sane as a public company CEO?
I would say I don't have maybe something like a discipline, right? But I think probably in general, looking at nature is what reassures me and inspires me.
And you mentioned before the back pain, you probably travel a lot, you have stress from the public markets, from everywhere basically. Overall, the journey that you have embarked over the past years, was it worth it for you?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I don't know what else I would have done if I wouldn't have done that, right? I don't complain, but maybe I would have even more enjoyed doing something else. I enjoy the ride, but it's hard.
I think that's probably a good summary, right? It's quite a ride, we've heard that, but it's brutally hard from what you described. So even being naive protects you in the beginning. In the long run, it catches up on you.
Very good point. Exactly. Maybe that's the difference. Not being naive anymore. I'm not sure I want to do it again.
Exactly. Jurgi, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure having you as a guest today, and I wish you all the best and lots of success for the future.
Thank you, Sylvain.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.